national scene to the local policy and law enforcement scene. And for this, we are now fortunate to have with us Deputy Assistant Chief Nilo Cuervo. Nilo Cuervo joined the Office of the State Attorney, Catherine Fernandez Rondo, in June of 2014 as the division chief in the Felony Division, where he supervised a team of attorneys and prosecuted homicide cases. In 2018, Mr. Cuervo was appointed by the state attorney to lead the gun violence reduction initiative. He works with police, local leaders, and the county's anti-violence initiative to build relationships with these impacted communities, deter criminal activity, and respond to contact shootings. GVRI team has investigated over 150 homicides, resulting in more than 50 arrests and confiscating more than 400 illegally possessed firearms, including AR-15s, AK-47s, and handguns with extended magazines. He has a special interest in developing community bonds and working closely with other agencies, which has led to participating with councils and commission groups throughout the county. Within his tenure, he has spoken at multiple town hall meetings, including those hosted by Senator Marco Rubio and Representative Federica Wilson, that steer him to serve as a liaison to community groups and advocates. Nilo continues to share his knowledge and expertise to pre-law students at Florida International University. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you now to Deputy Assistant Chief.
Thank you, Etione, so much for the wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for allowing us to be here. It's really a great honor and a great pleasure to present before the Melissa Institute and all the amazing panelists and guests that are here today. My presentation, I also want to thank Nick, who just finished his presentation, because a lot of the information that he provided, which I second almost all of it, is very helpful information in transitioning into this my presentation. So Nick, thank you so much for that great data. I really appreciate it. Let me introduce myself. My name is Nilo Cuervo, as Doctor said. I work for our state attorney, Catherine Fernandez Rondo. And one of my roles as a deputy chief assistant is to lead the gun violence reduction initiative, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So if I can please, I will share my screen now. One of the challenges, and again, Nick did a great job of explaining some of the data. Back in 2015, we were seeing an uptick in homicides and contact shootings and even non-contact shootings. So what the state attorney did back in 2015 is we essentially did we got all the data and we rounded up all the data of every single homicide that occurred in Dade County, every single contact shooting that occurred in Dade County. And by contact shooting, I mean a shooting where somebody is hit by a bullet, but luckily survives. And then non-contact shootings, right? Which is when somebody is shot at with a firearm, but luckily is not hit at all. So we started looking at all these trends throughout all of Miami-Dade County. And one of the things that we learned is what you see on the screen. In 2015 alone, there were roughly 1,000 non-fatal contact shootings in Dade County, 300 contact shootings. And one of the worst parts about this was the clearance rate was very, very, very low, meaning of all these crimes that were happening, there were very few arrests being made. And of those arrests being made, a lot of those cases end up being no action or no process, meaning they were dismissed, either because the victims did not want to testify or the evidence simply wasn't strong enough. And so what was happening is we were having all these contact shootings and non-contact shootings, but we weren't having any success or enough success bringing these cases to court and getting justice for the victims, right? And making sure that the perpetrators of gun violence crimes aren't able to perpetuate further gun violence crimes, right? And so that was the challenge. But the issue, one of the issues is, as we all know, Miami-Dade County is an incredibly large county. Today we have approximately 2.7 million residents, and that doesn't include all the tourists in town and things like that. So the state attorney said, all right, but where is this crime happening? And again, I want to thank Nick, who says something that is very, very true, and the data supports it, is that gun violence disproportionately impacts communities of color. So one of the things that the state attorney did is said, all right, let's map this out, right? Where is this happening? Where can we really target these areas? Because another trend that we were seeing is that majority of the victims and the shooters in a lot of these cases are young people, right? They're typically between the ages of 18 and 29. So that's what the data showed us, right? We have victims and shooters are between the ages of 18 and 29. We have a lot of shootings, but we don't have a lot of cases getting successful results in court. So that was the challenge. So we have to work on that. So the state attorney said, all right, let's get a map and let's plot every single shooting that happens in Miami-Dade County. And let's see are they everywhere? Is there a particular area that we need to focus on? Where is the problem? So the first thing we did is we said, all right, let's look at homicides between January and September of 2016. We just took that, that metric and said, all right, let's plot it in a map. For all of those who are familiar with Miami-Dade County, the map speaks for itself. For those of you who are not familiar with Miami-Dade County, this is the north end of the county. Towards the right or the east will be Miami Beach. And so we started plotting all of these incidents, right? And we noticed from January of 2016, we had 34 homicides, right? And so we plotted them. Those are the red dots, right? So we said, okay, how many contact shootings did we have in that same time? All right. So again, contact shooting is a shooting where a firearm is shot at somebody and makes contact with the victim, but the victim survives, luckily, right? And so we did the same thing, and here are the contact shootings. And as you can see, we had 77 contact shootings, right? That's a lot of contact shootings, right? We took the same time span, and we said, okay, now let's look at non-contact shootings, right? Shootings where somebody is shot at, but luckily is not struck by the bullet in any way. And we saw that there were 43. So what we did is, okay, now let's look at all of this evidence, right? Let's look at it all at once, and there you have it, right? And what you can notice is this is really all happening in an area that's about 50 blocks by about 30 to 40 blocks. So it's not a very big area. So what the state attorney's office did is we said, okay, here's the problem. We have to focus our energy on this community because this community needs our help, right? A lot of gun violence in this community is a community of color. They need our help, right? And so you see the concentration of all these shootings, these homicides, these contact shootings, and these non-contact shootings. And we said, all right, we have to focus here. We have to do something to help these folks, right? And so what we did is we then looked at all this data, right? And all these shootings, right? March 17th, Avante Shaw was shot, several times. No arrest was made in his case, and we just keep seeing all these examples of all these shootings. Samuel Roll was shot in the Flats. The Flats is the name given to a public housing unit that's in that community. We were also noticing, even police officers were getting shot. We had several police officers who were ambushed in their police car. It was an unmarked car, but they were ambushed in that community. And so we said, we have to do something about this, right? We have to do something about this. We did more data about public housing in the community. We noticed again, high levels of shootings in those areas. So what the state attorney did is we started the gun violence reduction initiative, which is what I'm going to talk about today. This is the way that we are targeting gun violence in the communities that need it most. We have two such units. We have one in Northside, Miami-Dade Police Department, Northside District, which is in that map that you saw there. And we have another one in Miami Gardens. I'm sorry, that's a typo. October 19th, it should say the Miami Gardens gun violence unit, which is just further north, but within that map that you saw there. And so what the gun violence unit is the following. What we did is, as you may know, the traditional concept of investigating gun violence goes like this. A crime occurs, whether it's a homicide, a contact shooting, or a non-contact shooting, right? The traditional model is that the police will go to the scene, of course. They will make the scene safe. If there's a victim, they will tend to that victim. They will make sure fire rescue comes and treats that victim, takes them to the hospital. And then once the scene is made safe, detectives will come in, right, and start investigating what actually happened, whether it be a homicide, a contact shooting, or a non-contact shooting. They will interview witnesses on scene. They will interview the victim, right? They will gather evidence, whether it be casings, whether it be a firearm, whether it be video. And they will conduct, their investigation. And then when they're done with their investigation, they will then go to the state attorney's office, right? And say, all right, they'll meet with a prosecutor and they'll say, all right, prosecutor, here's the evidence that we have on this case. Can we make an arrest? Can we not make an arrest? What can we do here? The problem with that model, is that by bringing in the state attorney at the end of the investigation, there's nothing now that can be done to make that investigation better because the investigation's over. So for example, the state attorney may say, wow, I wish we would have gotten a warrant to search this house or to search this car or to get these cell sites, whatever the case may be. Or I wish we would have done this or would have done that so we can make this case stronger. It's now too late for that because really the investigation is done. So what we've done is we've kind of flipped that model. And what the state attorney has done is created the gun violence unit, which now embeds with the police department 2 full-time gun violence prosecutors. So what happens now every time that there's a contact shooting in that area that you saw on the map, when detectives arrive to that scene, they will be arriving with somebody from my team, an assistant state attorney who has been trained and who has experience in investigating and prosecuting violent crimes. Why is this important? Because now we are part of the investigation. So what happens now is while the detectives are investigating the crime, right, and they do the investigation, they're the experts at investigating, but as the prosecutors, we are there giving them legal advice as to, do we need a warrant to search that house? Do we need a subpoena to get this information? We're already thinking about how this case could play out in court so that we can bring resolution and we can bring justice to the victims. So now we're working on the case together from the moment the case, from the moment the investigation begins. And so we're helping them secure search warrants with subpoenas, with legal questions. An officer may say, Nilo, I want to search that car. Can I? It's my job to say, well, I don't know if we have probable cause, or yes, but we got to do a warrant. So we're working on this case together from the inception. So as part of the program, there are 2 ASAs that are assigned, 2 prosecutors are assigned to the unit. There is also 1 full-time state attorney investigator. So one of the things that the state attorney did is that, as some of you may know, if you're a police officer here in Miami-Dade County, there's mandatory retirement age. After you serve a certain amount of time on the force, you're actually mandated to retire, right? And so what we saw happening is that there were a lot of detectives with a lot of experience having to retire from the police department, even though they're willing to work and continue to do the great work that they do and use all the vast experience that they have. So what we did is we said, okay, we will hire them as investigators for the state attorney's office, and they will assist in continuing to investigate these crimes. So now we have investigators with decades of homicide experience and contact shooting experience to help out in these investigations. And then finally, the unit also has a team of secretaries, paralegals, and we have victim specialists. And these really are victim specialists. Why? Because they also will go to the scene, right? They will go to the hospital to meet with the victim, see if they need any help with medical bills, right? In the unfortunate event that it's a homicide, does the family need help with funeral expenses, counseling services, all kinds of services, right? But instead of having them wait and come to the state attorney's office, excuse me, to get these services, we are going to them. We're going to the community and helping them. We got to make it easier for our victims. We got to make it easier for our witnesses. And we also have an entire team of community outreach representatives that work in our office. And they're constantly talking to community members and stakeholders, right? And so these are the benefits of the program. Is when, another thing that was happening that really, when we speak to victims of crimes and witnesses of crimes, one of their frustrations has been they're a witness to a crime. The police officers come to that scene. They will interview the witness, right? And then sometime later, after an arrest is made, days later, weeks later, whatever the case may be, they then have to go to the state attorney's office to be interviewed by a prosecutor, because as prosecutors, we also have to meet our witnesses. That doesn't sit well with a lot of witnesses, because they say, well, I sat with the detective, I sat with him for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I told him everything I know. Now you want me to go to the state attorney's office, and I live all the way down south. The state attorney's office is all the way in the north end of the county. I got to take off work. This is just not worth it. So one of the things we did is, again, the concept of let's make it easier for our victims, let's make it easier for our witnesses, is that since there's an ASA on scene, that ASA can interview that witness right there. So that witness or that victim now doesn't have to come to the state attorney's office all over again to retell that story, burdening their day, burdening their daily life, their ability to go to work that day or go to school that day or whatever the case may be. So we're doing on-site interviews. We're doing immediate turnaround on search warrants. One of the things that was happening is typically when a detective wants to get a search warrant for a house, for a car, whatever the case may be, they have to submit it to an ASA, an assistant state attorney, for approval before it can be sent to the judge. A lot of times that could take hours, it could take a day. We're doing them on site and on scene. So everything is happening quicker so that the detectives can really conduct the best possible investigation. And then we have on-site victim services, as I spoke about. Our victim specialists will go to the scene, speak to the victims, speak to the witnesses, identify what services they need, and provide those services, whether we provide it through our office or through our many, many, many community partners. And then finally, we have the ability to investigate this as a team, right? The program has now been in effect since 2018. So we've been around long, and the program's been around long enough where we finally have some really, really good data that we can rely on, meaning is the program working, right? And the results speak for themselves. In the last 5 years, in just that area that you saw, remember, it's not all of Miami-Dade County. It's just that area that you saw on the map, which is about 50 to 60 blocks by about 30 to 40 blocks. We have made 90 arrests for murder. Now, one of the things that was happening, as I spoke earlier, is that a lot of times folks were getting arrested, but the cases were being dismissed because there simply wasn't enough evidence to take it to court. That is no longer the issue. Of the people getting arrested for murder, we have charged 97% of them, right? So now we're making better cases, right? So we can go to court and really get justice for our victims, right? We have arrested over 50 defendants for attempted murder with a 78% filing rate. And during this time, now that we have those programs, we have since, and these numbers keep growing, but we have confiscated over 700 illegally possessed firearms. These are dangerous firearms who are in the hands of dangerous people. Because remember, one of the things about this program is we're focused on simply those people who are pulling triggers and who are violent felony offenders. Those are the folks we're investigating. Those are the folks we're prosecuting. Those are the folks we're targeting, the people doing harm to our community. And in those investigations, we have now recovered over 700 illegally possessed firearms. Assault rifles, illegally modified handguns, meaning guns that are meant to be semi-automatic that are illegally transitioned to become fully automatic, extended magazines. This is just one example. Last year, we conducted a search warrant on a contact shooting. And when we went into the house, this is what we found. Again, this is in that area that we saw on the map earlier. And as you can see in this one search warrant, we found this in one house. You see a number of assault rifles, AK-style rifles. Here at the bottom left, you see extended magazines, right? Some of these magazines hold 30, 40, 50 rounds, making them very, very dangerous, especially in the hands of violent offenders. Please excuse my cough, I'm sorry. This is just a close-up that I wanted folks to see. Here you have, the extended magazine, just really, really dangerous weapons in the hands of somebody who's engaged in criminal activity. One of the things that we often see is in gun violence cases, sometimes there is a narcotics nexus. This is another search warrant that we conducted where the offender not only is a violent felony offender, but he possesses a firearm, which he's not allowed to possess in the state of Florida because he's a convicted felon. And there you see all the drugs we found, cocaine, Molly, really, really, really dangerous drugs. And then you see what are the proceeds of the drug dealing activity. So we've made some really major arrests in the time that we've had the program. Back shortly in 2020, there were two young ladies who were hanging out in a apartment community in the Northside District, and they were the victims of a drive-by. And they were sisters. They were both shot. They were both murdered. They both died that day. Based on the GVI program, we were able to quickly make an arrest on that case, and we ultimately arrested two people. In 2021, we had a case that really shook the community, another drive-by shooting where a 7-year-old Alana Washington was shot and murdered. That is a scene that I was at. And we were able to make an arrest on that case. There was another case with a local pastor, well-known, beloved in his community, that was in a parking lot, having bought some food, was walking towards his car, and he was unfortunately in the middle of two rival gangs shooting at each other in broad daylight in a parking lot. And we made arrests in all of these cases. We also made an arrest in a fairly high-profile case involving members of the 4400 gang. One of the things that we're trying to do is investigate and prosecute gang members in the hopes to break up these gangs. And we were able to arrest, go to trial on, and get life sentences on two of their main members. And that was a really major arrest there. And then we've had some major convictions in the case of Alana Washington, the driver involved in that shooting, which not only did they shoot and kill 7-year-old Alana, they also shot a 1-year-old, luckily survived, and 2 other adults. So a total of 4 people were shot that day. And so that case, the case is still pending, but the driver has already pled guilty. We also obtained major convictions on several other cases. King Carter was one of the things that kind of started the state attorney's goal to start the GVI program. King Carter was, I mean, there you see him, little boy, who was shot, doing nothing wrong, playing outside, and his shooter was 17 years old, which adds to the issues of we're having young shooters, we're also having young victims. So one of the things that Nick spoke about that I also want to talk about is the prevention aspect of this, because as part of law enforcement, once we get involved, right, the shooting has occurred, and so we have to do what we have to do. We have to prosecute those offenders, make sure they're unable to do that. But one of the things that I do whenever we get a new case is that we really look into the victim and the defendant in this case, who said, what happened? Right? What went wrong here that led these folks to conduct shootings, right? And here are some of the things that we have seen prevalent. These are things that I've seen in almost every single case, right? When you look at a defendant and you say, I want a background on this defendant, what has he been doing, throughout his life? One of the first things we see is lack of schooling. A lot of times, especially when they're younger, when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, we will ask for their school records, and we'll notice lack of attendance, if any attendance at all, or poor performance, not involved in any extracurricular activities. A lot of times we get offenders who did not have stable housing conditions as a younger person, lack of strong family support, lack of employment. These are the things that I'm seeing that that I often see on most cases, right? So these are the most prevalent issues, and mental health issues, right? And we have a lot of folks in this panel. We have a lot of folks listening here today who are mental health professionals, and this is what we see: conduct disorder, intellectual disability, bipolar disorder, depression. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert in each of these things, but this is the information that we're getting about a lot of our offenders. So when we talk about prevention, right, and again, I'm a prosecutor, but the things I see every single day about these shooters, this is kind of the criteria that they meet, right? And this is where, as a community, as a society, we got to do a little better, right? Is to help these folks. So again, the entire the entire premise of the program, and we've had a lot of success. One of the other successes that we've had, now that the program's been around for 5 or 6 years, is that, as you know, when somebody gets arrested, especially for a major crime like homicide or attempted murder, the case sometimes will last several years before they're either closed, before they either go to trial, or they plead, or the case gets dismissed for whatever reason. So we now have data as to how well we're doing actually in court. And of the cases we've taken to court and tried, we've actually had a 100% conviction rate as of now. So meaning we're actually putting good cases together that can go to court, withstand judicial scrutiny, and get results for the victims, right? Get justice for the victims, and make sure that the perpetrators can't reoffend, right? And so the program has had a lot of success. And so that's what we're doing to really help that community, and that community needs our help. Another thing we see is incarcerated family members. A lot of times an offender will get arrested. Again, where we're doing our background, we'll realize, well, dad is in prison or mom is in jail. And so, when somebody is, having to jump all of these obstacles, we can see where things possibly go wrong. But these are some of the things in terms of prevention that, again, I'm not an expert in psychology, you folks are, but these are some of the issues that we're seeing as revolving issues, constant issues, when we're talking about offenders of violent crimes. And that's really the end of my presentation. I appreciate everyone's time. I look forward to the Q&A question, because really what I'd like to do is just answer the questions that folks may have about this program. But if anybody has any other questions, outside of today's agenda about gun violence, my information is there. I'm always available to speak to folks, especially experts such as yourself, that can help us so that we can help you. I'd like to network and do what we can to curtail gun violence in Miami-Dade County. And I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to the Q&A session. But I do want to again say that Nick, and again, I want to help you. I want to thank you, because a lot of your data really flowed perfectly into my presentation, because really Nick's data is why we have GVI.